number 40 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Hello, dear colleagues. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, April 23, 2026, the committee will resume its study of women's shelters and transitional housing. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members may attend in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. That's much appreciated. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For those on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. It's at the bottom of the screen. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation: Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I would like to remind witnesses that committee members may ask questions in French or English. If you need interpretation, please take a moment now to prepare your earpiece and select the listening channel you need in advance. Do it in advance, please, to save a few seconds later on if you will be speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. I won't break the flow if there's an exchange happening. Before we welcome our witnesses, I'd like to provide this trigger warning. We will be discussing topics related to gender-based violence. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If any participants feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk, Tina. For all witnesses and for all members of Parliament, it is important to recognize that these are difficult discussions, so let's try to be compassionate in our conversations. I will now welcome our witnesses for this first hour. From the Muskoka Women's Advocacy Group, Rochelle Walker, the Executive Director, and then from the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network, Marie McGregor from Pita Wanakwat, she is the Chair, and the Pauktutit Inuit Women of Canada, Lysa Audlaluk Watsko, Interim Board Chair. So we are now ready for your opening statements. Ms. Walker.
For 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Rochelle Walker, and I'm the Executive Director of the Muskoka Women's Advocacy Group. We operate 2 emergency gender-based violence shelters. We're located in the district municipality of Muskoka, which spans a massive area of almost 6,500 square kilometers. Our region is a collection of small towns, communities, and rural areas. In communities like ours, the barriers abuse survivors face are stark. We have little public transit, patchy cell service, regular hydro outages, and a lack of options normally found in larger urban areas. Many shelters across Canada regularly face frustration around the lack of safe and affordable housing choices for survivors. As highlighted by the Women's Shelters Canada study, shelters are often operating above their funded capacity. Frontline staff must extend stays repeatedly simply because there's nowhere feasible for women to go. Shelters end up in overflow positions because the housing system is broken. Transitional housing is a solid bridge for women, but it can't fix a broken market on its own, and we need more of it. Our agency manages a transitional housing program, or second stage as it's sometimes called, with 10 rent-geared income units, and this program provides many supports for survivors. But one key component that is impossible to replace is time. Urgency is not empowerment. Women enter our emergency shelters with valid concerns about the unknown, but also with relief. And then soon they are overwhelmed because they need to start looking for housing yesterday. Our housing program offers up to 2 years stay. It gives women some breathing room to regain independence, secure employment, and safely rebuild their lives. And it works. In the past 3 years, our transitional program has housed 34 women and their children. In 2023, 2 women reported that they were returning to their abusers after leaving the program. The other 32 did not. But when women leave shelter or second stage, they encounter a brutal for-profit housing market. Transitional housing is a vital lifeline, and it allows women time to study themselves and to strengthen their community, family, and friend relationships, which has normally been broken by an isolating abuser. They tend to generate real and safe options in that time, even when those options aren't perfect. But transitional housing could become a dead end if the federal government doesn't invest heavily in long-term affordable housing stock and what's needed to support it. If the federal government wants to work toward ending the cycle of violence and poverty, I have two recommendations. First, look past capital grants. Building structures, is only part of the solution. The federal government needs to consider earmarking substantial transfer payments of core operational funding for both emergency shelters and transitional housing. Without operational dollars, we can't pay staff to provide the necessary support to survivors. We can't cover increasing costs of utilities or make needed repairs. Second, funding has to take geography into consideration. A survivor's safety shouldn't be determined by where she lives in Canada. We need targeted dollars to expand infrastructure like basic and reliable transportation. For Muskoka, that means transit reaching to our geographic edges and beyond, so women aren't forced to choose between isolation or returning to danger. Financial stress is awful, but to an extent, financial stress can be managed. Living in violence can't. If we want survivors to manage the systemic housing gaps that follow them, of course we need to invest in capital projects, but also in minor capital strategies and in operational needs of shelters, transitional housing, and affordable long-term housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Walker. Mrs. McGregor, 5 minutes. The floor is yours, Mrs. McGregor. Oh. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, I misheard that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marie McGregor Pitawanakwat. I serve as chair to the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network and also as co-chair to the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network. I'm grateful to be able to provide comments today, and I do have a presentation that I will try to be as brief as possible with. So this is to the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. It's a brief discussion of the role and capacity of women's shelters and transitional housing. So I've got 5 issues briefly stated, a what will happen statement if the issues are not addressed, and then 5 recommendations to match the issues. So the first one is the matter of staffing of violence against women's shelters. The staffing numbers tell part of the story. So, for example, there are 3,546 full-time workers, 1,076 part-time workers, 1,682 casual or part-time relief staff at women's shelters and transition homes. The question is, are these numbers adequate for the number of clients being served? In addition, some of the issues include staff fatigue, high turnover, and recruitment challenges are some of the issues facing the staffing and human resources at shelters and transition homes. The second issue has to do with aging infrastructure. A survey in 2025 asked 618 violence against women shelter staff to participate in a national survey. 317 responded and participated. When asked about the condition of the buildings and infrastructure, 45% of the respondents indicated that major repairs were needed with costs of more than $40,000. When asked about minor repairs, survey respondents indicated that 31% of shelter buildings needed minor repairs at a cost of less than $40,000. Also stated was that many buildings were created before accessibility standards were imposed, which required retrofitting to comply with regulations. The third issue is the housing crisis and deep affordability, and these are reflected in shelters and transition homes having to turn away survivors after reaching capacity in the shelter or transition home. Survivors are also staying longer in both emergency shelters, transition homes, and second stage shelters. This means that beds and units are not as available to new survivors as formerly, since survivors are staying there longer. The next issue is fundraising, and this one is vital. And in quotes, the need to raise funds for core operational costs is almost universal, unquote. So fundraising is conducted to cover renovations at 71%, technology at 51%, transportation at 50%, office administration 44%, salaries 47%, safety and security 36%, utilities 31%, and rent or mortgage 19%. And this is from the Hugandam and Madwa Koram study of 2026. The next issue is what I'd call multifaceted needs. So for instance, shelters, emergency shelters, and transition homes are working with clients who present multifaceted needs. Some clients have histories of sexual exploitation, trafficking, forced marriage, and family violence. Clients include Indigenous women, clients living in rural, remote, northern, and isolated communities, immigrant women, 2SLGBTQ1A+ individuals, and women involved in sex work, and survivors of human trafficking. In addition, technology-facilitated gender-based violence shows up as tracking, hacking, and harassment of clients. So this work requires increasingly specialized, trauma-informed, and culturally safe approaches. So I turn now to, okay, so what happens if not enough is done? The view of clients and shelter workers has to change.
Madame McGregor, je dois vous...
Ms. McGregor, I must interrupt you. The 5 minutes is up. I have to interrupt you. The 5 minutes are over. I thank you. You'll be able to fill in later during the questions. Now I'll give the floor to Ms. Odlaluk Watsko.
For 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for this invitation. My name is Liza Watsko. I'm here on behalf of both the Inuit Women of Canada, the national representative organization for Inuit across this country. Since 1984, our mandate has been to advocate for a systemic change to improve the social, cultural, and economic well-being of Inuit women. Housing interests have been central to that work for decades. I want to begin with a simple statement for Inuit women. The issues before this committee are not policy questions. They are human rights emergency. The lack of the safe, affordable, and culturally appropriate housing is a crisis rooted in forced settlement, one that places Inuit women in danger every day. The numbers from our own research are stark. 52.9% of Inuit Nunanga live in overcrowded housing. 32.7% live in homes requiring major repairs. Inuit women are 6 times more likely than non-Indigenous women to live in unsuitable housing. Approximately 59% of Inuit communities have no emergency shelter. This means that many Inuit women fleeing violence have nowhere safe to go. 62% of urban Inuit women surveyed by Paututit have avoided going to the shelter due to feeling unsafe or facing discriminatory treatment. Overcrowding is not just a housing problem, it is a violence problem. When there are no alternatives, Inuit women are forced in dangerous situations. The link between housing insecurity and gender-based violence is a daily reality in our communities. The crisis also exists outside of Inuit Nunangat. As more Inuit move to cities, the lived realities of urban Inuit require equal attention from this committee. At Pauktutit, we have spent decades collecting evidence and building solutions. We co-developed and co-chaired the Shelter Initiative for Inuit Women and Children with the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation and Indigenous Services Canada. This was proven Inuit-led model with representatives reviewing and selecting projects. As of 2025, 12 Inuit-led shelter transitional housing projects have been approved, including an emergency shelter and transitions home in Puvilnituk, Nunavik. We are also leading a national housing and shelters research and advocacy initiative examining lived experiences across the full housing continuum. Our finding is clear. Housing insecurity is more than an infrastructure problem. It is a systems failure requiring federal policy reform. Despite this progress, I must be honest with this committee when asked to rate how well current federal housing policies meet Inuit needs on a scale of 1 to 5. Pauktutit rates this current system 2. Current system A2, sorry. Why? There are 4 core failures. There was no stable multi-year funding for Inuit women's shelter organizations. The affordability benchmark in the National Housing Strategy, which is 30% of regional income, is meaningless in communities where the cost of living is 40 to 100% higher than in southern Canada. Funding cycles are short, competitive, and administrative burden. This undermines the ability of Inuit organizations to plan and deliver sustained solutions. Inuit Tapili Canadami has identified a need for $33.04 billion over 10 years just to bring Inuit core housing needs to the Canadian average. Federal budgets do not come close to meeting this need. The committee is asking what support measures are needed. Pauktuit's answers are: 1, establish a dedicated Inuit women housing and shelter fund, a distinction-based federally administered funding stream must be co-developed with Inuit women's organizations. It requires multi-year operational support and investment that reflects northern construction realities. 2, permanently fund
excusez-moi de vous...
Excuse me, I apologize to interrupt you. Ms. Odelakwatsko, your time is up. There's someone from the technical team who will be in touch with you because your internet connection is weak. So to ensure we can keep you on the line, somebody will call you. Thank you for picking up the phone from technicians. Now, we'll move to our first round of questions with Ms. Goodridge. Thank you, Madam Chair.
This is for being here, and thanks for the work that you guys do serving vulnerable women. I want to quickly shout out to Ms. Watsko. Your photography is stunning, like truly stunning. If you haven't checked it out, I would recommend everybody look at it, but sorry. And that's nothing to do with this, but it gives a very good demonstration of some of the housing challenges that the Nunavummiut face. So thank you for sharing that piece and that beautiful art. Ms. Walker, I was chatting with one of my colleagues earlier today, and he was telling me that before he was the mayor of Huntsville and before he was the member of parliament for Parry Sound, Muskoka, my colleague Scott Aitchison led the fundraising for Chrysalis, your transitional housing in Huntsville. And he said that he did it in collaboration with one of your predecessors because they saw the need. They understood the importance of transitional housing as a community and decided to just do something about it and not wait for the government of Ontario or any level of government to step up. They just did it. And I was wondering, you spoke about transitional housing. Can you speak about what the importance of transitional housing is and why it and how it serves people?
Sure. Transitional housing. So I mean, like I said when I spoke earlier, it's about giving women time. When women come into the shelter, it's traumatizing. They are uprooting themselves. They're uprooting their children. It's scary. It's an unknown thing. By the time they go into transitional housing from our shelters, they're well acquainted with the staff. They realize that the building is very secure because our transitional housing is attached to our Huntsville shelter. And while they're there, we do have staff that they can access for support during their stays. So they're not doing everything on their own for the first time. Quite often we have women who have never even opened a bank account before. So someone can, help guide them through those kinds of things. It's all of the little daily things that you take for granted if you live alone. It's new for these women in a lot of cases, or they've been made to feel that because of the abuse, that they're stupid, that they can't do it. So, we are there to provide support and also, a roof over their heads and just help out in the ways that we can.
No, and thank you for that. And one of the pieces that I really appreciated that you talked about was the taking into consideration geography. And I think that's one of the things the government of Canada is especially bad at. I'm the member of parliament for Fort McMurray Cold Lake. I represent 142,000 square kilometers covering most of northern Alberta. And it's an immensely large territory, and it has a variety of different communities, from large cities like Fort McMurray and Cold Lake down to tiny little Indigenous communities and everything in between. And the needs do not necessarily get served because someone decides, well, if you go an hour away, there is a shelter. Or if you go 3 hours, there's a shelter. So, this should be good enough. And I'm wondering if all three of you women can talk about the importance of having supports close to home so that people have that support network that they already have while they are finding ways out of abuse. Perhaps Ms. McGregor Petawanakwak can start.
Yes, I think the idea of the isolation, many communities being rural, remote, and isolated is an important consideration, especially when a lot of the communities cannot be accessed unless you fly in or travel by boat when the water is open. And so there needs to be some kind of consideration for shelter services for those kinds of communities. I know that there's a group called the Rural Development Network in Alberta that's working on these kinds of things, and they've been very progressive and sort of grassroots thinking about consulting with people regarding what they need in terms of shelters, second stage homes, and transition homes. So I think that that's very useful. So connection with them would be very valuable, I think. And yes, there need to be shelters and services for those in remote areas as well. Thank you.
Ms. Walker?
Okay. So remaining in the community. So when we are at capacity or over capacity, we will often refer women to other shelters in our region. Parry Sound is a one that's a little bit closer to us, and same with the Aurelia shelter. And women don't want to leave their areas. They have family and friends established here. They are familiar with just the layout of the major towns around here or the area that they're from. They might have kids who are in school, they might have a job, and they might not have transportation to get to that job. So if a woman is from Bracebridge and she wants to stay in the Bracebridge shelter and we don't have room, going to Huntsville isn't even really an option. As far as public transit, there is some public transit here, but it's not at all like an urban center. So yeah, it's really, it's destabilizing for women to leave their communities.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ms. Goodridge. That'll be it for the first round. Go ahead. Ms. Gladue, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'm very interested in what you have to say, and I'll start my questions on the topic of the rural reality for shelters and transitional housing. I'm trying to understand how big the gaps are in the various areas. So I'll go to each of you, starting with Ms. Walker.
Okay, the gaps in each of the areas. Okay, so as far as housing, when it comes to Muskoka, when it comes to market rent, one of the issues that we face here as far as women accessing housing is that a lot of places, a lot of independent landlords, and when I say that, I mean people who have a granny flat in their home or they have a room to rent out, they tend to prefer to use that as an Airbnb situation instead of renting it out long-term to someone. So that takes places off the market that our women could potentially rent. So what's left are less units to rent at inflated prices. So, I mean, I was looking at rentals around here not too long ago. In Gravenhurst, there was one, it was $900, a room to rent in a basement, fully furnished and no window, so no proper egress. When I first moved here in 2014, I had an 800 square foot apartment with windows on the second floor, lots of room, lots of light, clean and beautiful. And that is quite a change over the past, 12 years. That's quite something. So that's huge. And transportation is also, as I've mentioned, huge for women here.
Okay, very good. Lisa, I think that you can talk a little bit about the budget that put some funding towards gender-based violence, the National Action Plan, and how is the funding that the government's providing helping in your area to address the needs of women there?
Funding, we namely look for funding and around that by applying directly to those base programs. It is still a little bit rare to get into them because it's so limited. But they're starting, we're only getting familiarized with those areas because it's so limited with that gender-based one. Otherwise, I will have to come back to that question after I get that someone in our in-house to answer better with the funding.
Okay, you can send it to the clerk when you get the answer.
Thank you.
Marie McGregor, then, I wanted to ask you about how big the gap is that you see in this transitional housing space, and also give you some time to finish the 5 recommendations that you wanted to make.
Thank you for that. Yes, there is a gap. When you think about a territory the size of, think about 49 communities in Northern Ontario, and many of those are fly-in, and many of those are accessible only when the river ice has broken. And some of those are accessible only by winter roads in the winter. So that tells you about how difficult transportation is. And then the other challenge to that is that building and construction materials need to be trucked in over the ice roads during the winter or shipped in by barge when the waters are open. So all of that compounds the cost for building materials. And a couple of years ago, I heard an estimate for the cost of an ordinary 3-bedroom bungalow in the far north was $700,000. And it wasn't a fancy house or a big house by any means. It was just a plain, ordinary little 3-bedroom bungalow, $700,000. And that was like 3 years ago. And with the rates of inflation the way they are, who knows what that number is now. So what's happening is that housing affordability is beyond the reach of many people, in particular women. So one of the questions you want to ask yourself when you're working with this is, what do we need? Not what do we want. What do we want tells you that, A, you should have a 3-car garage and a swimming pool. What you need tells you is, can I have a door that locks at night? Can I be warm and wake up the next morning? Can I have a window to look out of? Is there a place that I can cook and wash and sit and enjoy my book? So the big question is, what is the difference between need and want? And as I drive around in the South around here, I see so many examples of want, 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 and the destruction of natural resources just because of want. And it's heartbreaking. I'm sorry. I wish I had a better answer.
No, it's okay.
But there it is.
It's a fine answer, and I'm just running out of time. So if you would mind sending those 5 recommendations through to the clerk so that the committee can look at them when we're putting together our recommendations. Thank you so much. I think I'm just about at the end of my time.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Ms. Gladue. Ms. Larouche, 6 minutes for you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for joining us today, the 3 witnesses, but 5 minutes for opening remarks is short. You seem to have a lot to say about this issue that really affects your communities. So I'll start with Ms. Otlaluk Watsko. I'm trying to follow. I think at the end you were able to name just one recommendation, distinct funding, and then you had to stop your opening remarks. So I'd give you the opportunity to continue if you have other recommendations to conclude what you wanted to tell us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I have 3 more points in that. Number 2 was that permanently fund the shelter initiative for Inuit women and children. It is proven Inuit-led model. It must be a scaled and permanently sustained, not subject to funding renewals. 3, serve urban Inuit. Shelter strategies must address the growing population of Inuit living in cities. They face discrimination, cultural isolation, and an absence of Inuit-specific services. And 4, establish accountability mechanisms. Canada has commitments under the National Housing Strategy, the Inuit Crown Partnerships Committee, and the National Action Plan to end the gender-based violence. This committee should recommend binding implementation timelines, public reporting, and outcome targets developed with Inuit Women's Organization. In closing, the 2019 National Housing Strategy Act identifies housing as a fundamental human right. Baltuti asks this committee to ensure that the right is operationalized, not just acknowledged, for Inuit women, girls, and gender diverse Inuit.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I might be able to ask further questions later on, but for now, I'll turn for the rest of my questions to, I'll turn to Ms. McGregor. I'd like to know, do Indigenous women, from what you've said, Ms. McGregor, Indigenous women off reserve, are they in a gray zone where they have difficulty accessing services?
Yes, there is a gray zone. There is, I don't know what to call it. There is federal legislation that governs lands and Indians. Now, this is called the Indian Act, and it was made in 1876. And under that act, 1/3 of 1% of all of the land in Canada falls under the jurisdiction of the Indian Act, and the lands are held in trust by the federal government, so that individual Indians living on Indian reserves cannot sell that land. It's communally held. So when it comes to women, if, for instance, through domestic violence or marital breakdown or whatever, the woman is forced to leave the home, that gray area means that she usually has to leave the reserve and seek support elsewhere, seek shelter elsewhere. And I realize also that there are matrimonial property laws that exist, and I'm not familiar with how those work, and I'm not sure which First Nations have accepted them and which have not. But my experience with women who have undergone family conflict is that they are often shunned and ostracized and made fun of. And so they will leave the reserve, and the typical reasons will be for medical services, for employment, or for education, or just plain they are homeless. So they end up going to cities and towns and looking for accommodation, and they try to restructure their lives. And so what you have are patriarchies that function according to the way the Indian Act operates. And then an example of the, what's the word for it? The prevalence. It's such a high prevalence that any other viewpoint is discarded. And an example of that viewpoint is the concept of Indigenous Allodial Land Title, ALLODIAL. What this means is that Indigenous people hold original title or underlying title to their lands, irrespective of any foreign government that came as recently as 150 years ago and imposed it. And so the women who are evicted from their homes have every right to go and live on the other 99% because that's still their land too. So this is the kind of view that we're adopting and accepting and starting to work with. And again, I don't know if that helps, but that's sort of what I'm thinking. Thanks.
I think that's it for my time, Madam Chair. You have 2 seconds left. I'll talk about housing solutions with you later. Thank you, Ms. Cody. 5 minutes.
Thank you, through your chair. I want to say thank you to all the witnesses for coming today on such an important topic. My questions, I'll start with Rochelle Walker. The National Shelter Study in 2024 update shows that the shelter occupancy increased by 8% from 2023. Do you see the affordability crisis and rising cost of living as a factor resulting in this increase in the length of stay and higher occupancy rates in shelters? And has shelter occupancy continued to increase throughout these past couple of years?
Yeah, I think that when there are options taken off the table for women, then shelter seems like it should be the option. Although I would argue too, I mean, we see women coming into the shelter who are in serious need of a safe place to stay, that they are being stalked, the abuse is continuing after she's left the home. We have women come in sometimes as well who think that they are almost not home free. I don't want to use that term because there are no homes to rent. But I mean that they're okay once they're in shelter, once they're away from the abuser. And that's not the case. Abuse tends to escalate after a woman leaves. And that's when it becomes the most severe. And quite often women don't even realize until they're in shelter that the situation is going to be a little bit worse, or maybe much worse than she thought originally. So yeah, I think, the lack of affordable housing is what stops women from having the options. And I do think, I mean, women who have affluence are able to make choices that women who don't have money can't. But I also think sometimes those women could actually benefit from a shelter stay as well.
As intimate partner violence is increasing and elder abuse, I'm hearing, is from several people, is on the rise as well. We're seeing significant growth of people seeking shelter systems. And unfortunately, what I'm hearing is our shelters for women specifically are full. And where are these women realistically go at night if they're turned away from a shelter system? And what risk does that create for their safety?
That's for me too?
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. We don't turn women away. We have to turn women away from our specific shelters. We don't leave women without options. So our staff will call around to other shelters, the closest ones to us, and they will just keep working outward in concentric circles until they find something. We also have put women into hotels when we feel that we do some risk assessing on the phone and make sure that they're safe enough to stay in a hotel for a night or two. And we have movement sometimes. Sometimes we don't. So, but we never leave a woman without options. And if she chooses not to take them, that's her choice at the end of the day. But we always offer as many options as we can.
Well, survivors of human trafficking often require unique supports to help them recover from the deep trauma and extreme abuse they experienced. What unique assistance and support and safe spaces are needed for these vulnerable women seeking shelter to protect them? And in your view, do you think the current shelter system provides this support? And again, that's for Ms. Walker.
Okay. I think that women who are leaving human trafficking, there are similarities definitely, but there are a lot of differences as well. I mean, a woman who's coming into the shelter because of an intimate partner relationship is leaving typically one abuser. There might be some abuse coming from extended family on that side, but when a woman is leaving a human trafficking situation, she has more than one abuser to worry about. She has deep trauma. Quite often these women are leaving situations where they've been abused their entire lives. I mean, from childhood onward. And I know that there's a lot of there are further psychological impacts that go along with that than a typical woman coming in for a typical shelter stay. So I think what these women need is time as well. I mean, I think 2 years minimum is something that's going to help a woman be able to rebuild her life, but she's leaving a very traumatic situation. She needs to be able to rebuild from the ground up.
In my community, I've heard from a lot of women that they'd rather live in their cars than in shelters. There's a lot of drug use, active drug use that goes on within the shelter system, and it's deterring them from going to these shelters. And this is particularly difficult for women with children who don't want to expose their kids to unsafe environments, and for our vulnerable seniors. And so what can we do to address these issues of drug use and violence within these shelters, which it seems to be a barrier for women and young adults and seniors seeking shelter?
Désolée, Madame.
If
I apologize, Ms. Cody.
it's provided to in writing, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Time goes by so quickly. Ms. Desrochers, for 5 minutes. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First, thank you to the witnesses for joining us today, and thank you for all of the work you do on the ground. I know you work with very vulnerable communities, women who are in very vulnerable situations, so thank you very much. It's not easy work. You do important work. We know that the housing crisis is a major factor in the difficulties faced by women who experience violence, and that's why our government has committed to increase affordable housing units across the whole spectrum. Transitional housing, affordable, very affordable housing, social housing, and we've committed to doubling this. And it's been raised by the 3 witnesses, I believe, that there isn't enough affordable housing. It's 4% in Canada, one of the lowest rates in the OECD. We've committed to doubling it to at least 8% in the coming decade. We've created Build Canada Homes with $13 billion to have more projects get started. It includes $1 billion for transitional housing with support. We know it's not enough. The portal opened in December. We could already spend all of that money, and we know it's not enough to meet the need. There's $4 billion. I'm giving this information because I really want to provide the context for my question. I'll try to go quickly, but $4 billion in funding for communities through Indigenous services for urban and rural and northern communities. And it's not just that, because with Build Canada Homes, we've made commitments with Indigenous communities, and on the rural issue, because 20% of the funding, it's the floor. At least 20% will go to rural communities, so they really receive that. And so this is to renew the National Housing Strategy. That's why today's conversation is really important. The recommendations you make will help with that. My first question is for Ms. McGregor Bitawanakwat.
that this is going in the right direction, and we understand this is not enough, and we understand that this has to be combined with some work in prevention. But are you welcoming those investments from the government?
Yes, I'm pleased to hear that those kinds of investments are being made, and I'd like to put a plug in for the National Indigenous Collaborative Housing Incorporated, otherwise known as NICHI. They have a nationwide collection of organizations that are housing providers for Indigenous communities, and they work on and off reserve as well as with non-status urban, and some of the projects have provided shelter facilities for women and children. So they're doing very good work, and they need to hear that the commitment will be kept, that what they heard in the beginning. So that's important. The other thing I want to say about the whole issue is that the multidimensional needs come from not just human beings' difficulties, but we're also looking at the external reality of what the climate is doing to human beings. So, for example, you've got floods in some communities, you've got forest fires that destroy other communities, and you've got other major natural disasters that cause power outages for hundreds, if not thousands, of people at a time. And so there's that, and there's emergency preparedness that's needed for that, natural disaster preparations and work that needs to be done for that. And the other thing that I've seen with the Build Canada Home strategy is an interest in building to scale and building at scale. And what that says to me is that a majority of that funding will be for developers and contractors. Somewhere along the way, there needs to be a niche or an opening for people that want to learn to build their own. And the reason I say that is because Indigenous people have been on the North and Central and South American continent since time immemorial, 50,000 years before present, BP. And in that 50,000 years, Indigenous peoples have been able to provide housing for themselves.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Ms. McGregor. That's all the time we have. Ms. Larouche, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you very much to the witnesses for being with us today. We understand that the needs are great and that the study is important. I will ask this question to Ms. McGregor first, and then maybe others will be able to answer afterward. We'll see. It could be Ms. Walker as well. We see that the Anunisha project in Indigenous communities by and for Indigenous people, how is it important to have solutions that are led by Indigenous communities rather than imposed in a one-size-fits-all model?
Yes, I really like that idea that that co-development is important, as well as people learning how to build our own homes again. And so what happens, if you go to any reserve and you see where homes have been built, and they've been built by the contractors or developers, that what's missing sometimes is the inclusion of the people for whom those homes were built, as in the training, the participation, the co-design, the set up the grounds, design the rooms, put the thing together. So there's a lot of hands-on, on-the-ground work that's missing. And so once they get into the home and you've got the key, and then all of a sudden things start to go wrong, well, then it's everybody else's fault that, you know, the toilet doesn't flush, or the blinds don't work, or the fan is out of order, and this kind of thing. Whereas if people had the on-the-ground experience putting this stuff together, learning how to do it, and I'm assuming here that these are the trades that have to do with building homes. And this can include Indigenous peoples, the gender diverse, women, young people, learning how to do again what we used to be able to do. Then you would see a lot of pride in ownership, a pride in maintaining these things. And how do I know this? Because I've done it myself. If anyone tries to separate me from my tiny home, woe betide. I'll stop there.
Merci beaucoup, Madame McGregor.
Thank you very much, Ms. McGregor, for that information. Now the floor goes to Ms. Roberts for 5 minutes.
And through you, my first question is to Ms. Rachel Walker. First of all, before I ask my question, I want to say you guys are doing an amazing job, but you're not just helping women, you are heroes, because it takes people like yourself to dedicate your life to helping other women. So I want to thank you. You deserve it. So my question, Ms. Walker, this committee continues to hear heartbreaking testimony from women who want to leave violent situation but simply cannot find affordable housing or shelter space. After nearly a decade of Liberal housing strategies and spending announcements, shelters like yours are still overwhelmed and operating at capacity. What are you seeing on the front lines? Why are women still falling through the cracks? And what should this government do to help? Did we lose her? Oh my God, I lost her? Oh, maybe she's upset? Oh, hello?
Oh, no.
Oui. Est-ce
Did we lose her?
Oui. Est-ce que Madame Roberts, votre question?
Ms. Roberts, could your question be asked?
Yeah, okay.
Oh, wait a minute, I hear something in my ear. No? Okay. All righty, so I guess I scared her away. I do that to people. So my next question will be to Ms. Lieza, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. So you spoke earlier about 3.4 billion needed to assist with housing. You spoke about this action plan. So on April 24th, 2026, Housing Minister announced funding for housing. So there was nearly 2 billion that will be going towards based agreements with First Nations, Inuit, and Meta partners. 1.2 billion in existing funding, as well as 780 million top-up for new funding. How has this helped your community? Did I lose her too? Oh my
No,
goodness, I must
no,
be
it's Liza. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Can you repeat the last part? Sorry.
So there was a top-up of 780 million funding. How is this helping your community? Like, have you started to see it flourish?
So because we lack trades up here north, the ambition is good there with the housing proposal for, I think 3,000. It was Nunavut 3,000. It was, but the trades, because we lack so much trades up here to build a house, that has gotten slower than planned, and so we are slow in building. But even with that coming, we already have been informed that that will be lower than you expected, because there's so much more housing needed for young families having children.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm on a timeline here. So what is the timeline? Because it sounds like there's a desperate need in your community, which I appreciate and respect. But what is the timelines? Do you think that this will be fulfilled? And is there an incentive to encourage individuals with the trades to move up there to help assist with the building of the homes?
Not to my knowledge. We are too slow with the trades and not enough programs for the college programs for the trades. It's what I'm seeing firsthand.
Is there any opportunity to encourage individuals that don't live there? Is there an incentive for them to come and assist?
We have not much choice but to have outside of Nunavut or Inuit Nunangat to come help us, and we have been seeing that since that incentive. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess my next question will be to Ms. McGregor. Are you seeing any assistance with the funding announcements in your community to build more shelters? Are any of those funds coming to your organization?
I'm not directly familiar with funding coming to the communities I'm working with, but I know that there are other organizations, like, for example, the Ontario Aboriginal Housing Secretariat, the Aboriginal Housing Management Association, the Rural Development Network, and then there are organizations in Quebec that are working with Indigenous people to create shelters and transition homes. So, yes.
From the federal government, you haven't had any conversations?
No, I haven't had direct input.
Merci, Madame McGregor. Ce sera le vote.
Thank you, Ms. McGregor. That will be it for that exchange.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Here. Okay, my microphone is on. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. I learned about the other day Canada Housing Benefit for Survivors that provides portable housing benefits. And I was wondering if this is a program that either of your organizations are familiar with or have know of and are using in your supports for women. So it's a specific housing benefit that is for survivors that provides portable housing benefits, so some financial dollars to help survivors. Is this something that you're aware of, or something that has been talked about in your network?
I am familiar with one example of a group called Keepers of the Circle operating in Kirkland Lake, Ontario. They're building a modular panel factory which will provide modular panels for constructing housing. And this is a program that's women-led, and the tradespeople working in the factory will be Indigenous women and 2S LGBTQ. And they are now in the process of designing 3 shelters to be built using those modular panels from that factory. So that's one example that I'm aware of right now. But as for other ones, I haven't yet been briefed on it, so that one I know about. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I'm going to switch tracks a little bit because my questions were a bit more directed to our witness from the Muskokas. I wanted to ask about other innovations, so this is actually a great example, Ms. McGregor, that you just raised, but interesting innovations or practices that you think are helping or really leading edge that we should be taking note of to make sure that as we develop programs, as we provide supports, that we're building those practices in. And that's a question for both organizations.
Okay. I have a favorite hobby horse, and it has to do with agency, independence, and self-sufficiency. One of our studies that was funded through CMHC was the examination of natural alternative building materials as a way to use traditional teachings incorporated with natural materials so that Indigenous women and Two-Spirit can learn how to build our own homes again. So those 5 materials included stone, straw bale, timber frame, log, and cordwood stackwood. So that study was completed a couple of years ago, and this summer later, we'll be doing a demonstration build using 2 of those materials, straw bale and hempcrete. And what we hope to demonstrate, is how physically demanding it is, how labor-intensive, how much hard work it is, but at the same time, how much less cash you will have to put up front in order to build something. We also intend to demonstrate that needs are very different from wants, and if people can be specific about what they need and how to meet those needs, then they can put together buildings for homes that will meet the needs. So that's another example of the activity that is going to be happening. Beyond that, floor is open.
Lisa, would you mind sharing if there's any innovative practices that you think we should be considering or thinking about continuing to resource?
I am not too familiar with that area as well. We can look into it in our organization, but there have been talk at my community about modular homes being put into place for temporary housing. But it was an organization that was separate from our areas, and I thought, wow, that's a great idea. So there is no real linkages from their program to ours, but I think that some innovations that are coming up north are also adaptable to what we can do and what we're seeing and what we can do, because I think they're portable and I think they may work and heating wise. Otherwise, there's no real programs or projects with that yet, to my knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. I learned, Onefini? Oh, okay. I was just going to say that I just learned from my colleague that there is an agreement with Nunavut to help build out a facility that will help us build more modular homes in Nunavut and build them in the territory. That's coming online, so we're really excited. It's something that we are supporting.
Voilà.
So.
L'information est transmise.
The information has been shared. Thank you to each of the witnesses who joined us today. Thank you, Ms. McGregor. Thank you to all of you. I will suspend for a few moments while we prepare the next panel. Thank you. Of a vicious cycle, what we see is that once women have experienced violence and are in precarious situations, that has a direct impact on their mental health and their capacity to continue holding down a job. They have complex trauma after experiencing violence and instability. The instability of always having to move. For example, as a survival strategy to hide from an abuser or because the home was violent. So that affects women's mental health, and it can create issues of dependence. So those three issues directly affect women's lives. And once they have a financial precarity, there's that vicious cycle again because they might be exploited again. They'll be very vulnerable. So shelters are essential because they offer direct support to women, support tailored to their needs. There are many needs in relation not only to mental health or addiction. And what we see is that shelters have a major role that they're playing, and they're working flat out. They can't meet all of these needs. And as my colleague said, shelters deal with some issues and try to help women out of these vicious cycles, but without access to affordable housing and community support, women are in situations where they won't be able to leave the shelter, or when they leave. Julie, that will be the end for your opening remarks. You'll surely have the opportunity to speak more later. So, Ms. Defina, welcome. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jasmine Defina. I'm the Executive Director of Safe Hope Home, one of Canada's few survivor-led recovery programs for survivors of human trafficking. I also work within the victim services sector, supporting survivors navigating violence, housing insecurity, trauma, and exploitation. I also speak from lived experience. Housing insecurity and gender-based violence are deeply connected. Many women stay in abusive situations because they cannot afford to leave. They have nowhere to go, they cannot support themselves independently, and fear losing their children. Like many women that I have worked with, I have personally remained in abusive situations and later entered into other unhealthy relationships, in part because of financial insecurity and housing instability. We often ask women why they stay, but we don't ask whether Canada has created the conditions to make that leaving realistically possible. One of the biggest gaps that I want this committee to understand is that survivors of human trafficking cannot access appropriate shelter and housing spaces at all. Human trafficking and violence against women are connected, but they are not identical issues. And trafficking survivors often have very different safety risks, trauma responses, clinical needs, and recovery needs. Most violence against women shelters are not designed for the complexity of trafficking cases, and trafficking survivors rarely gain access to specialized beds because Canada has so few across the country. At the same time, mainstream shelter environments can sometimes increase safety risks for trafficking survivors due to recruitment concerns, gang involvement, organized crime connections, trauma triggers, addictions, and high level of clinical support that is required. Canada needs specialized trafficking-specific stabilization and recovery spaces. And within trafficking-specific programming, we also cannot treat all survivors the same. Women without children and mothers often require separate living environments and program structures. Women with children need recovery spaces designed specifically for mothers and children together, while other trafficking survivors often require highly specialized adult-focused recovery environments. Right now, there are simply not enough spaces. At Safe Hope Home, we consistently maintain a wait list. Organizations across the country are full, and nationally, there are only a very small number of specialized human trafficking recovery programs, like fewer than 10 dedicated long-term programs across the country. Many of these programs are also not funded through ministries responsible for housing or long-term residential recovery. Despite housing being one of the central needs survivors face, instead, organizations are often forced to piece together unstable funding from multiple short-term resources while trying to provide highly specialized intensive care. Trauma recovery also does not happen in 30, 60, or even 90 days. For many survivors of trafficking and severe violence, healing takes years. What Canada needs is a staged continuum of care for survivors of violence and trafficking. We need specialized emergency stabilization spaces for women fleeing violence and exploitation. We need long-term women-only addictions and mental health treatment that is trauma-informed and specifically designed for survivors of violence. We need long-term live-in recovery programs where women can heal the trauma, attachment wounds, survival, coping mechanisms, and vulnerabilities that keep them at risk of re-exploitation and returning to abusive situations. We then need supportive transitional housing and independent living options where women can slowly rebuild stability while continuing to receive wraparound support. And finally, we need long-term affordable and subsidized housing so that women are not pushed back into dangerous situations simply because they cannot afford to survive. These services also cannot continue to rely on temporary pilot projects and unstable year-to-year funding. Gender-based violence, trafficking, and housing insecurity are not temporary problems. They have existed for generations and continue every day across this country. The funding response should reflect that reality. Across Canada, shelters and transition house programs are overwhelmed. Women are turned away due to lack of beds, return to abusive partners, and end up homeless and vulnerable to further exploitation. Young girls are being recruited into trafficking directly from homelessness, child welfare involvement, couch surfing, and unsafe housing situations. We also need to acknowledge that the response varies drastically by province. Trafficking survivors are highly transient, yet the quality of care changes drastically depending on where they are in Canada. Ontario's anti-trafficking strategy has created stronger coordination and specialized responses, but we need national consistency. The federal government should establish minimum of standard of care and coordinated anti-trafficking responses across every province and territory so that survivors receive consistent quality support wherever they go in this country. We must also realize that labor trafficking remains severely underidentified and underserviced in Canada. We need specialized live-in recovery and stabilization programs for labor trafficking survivors as well, including migrant workers, newcomers, experiencing exploitation, coercion, and debt bondage. I also want to emphasize that investing in long-term recovery systems is fiscally responsible. When women receive stable housing, trauma recovery, addictions care, and long-term support, governments see reduced emergency room visits, reduced psychiatric admissions, reduced justice system involvement, reduced incarceration, reduced homelessness, and reduced child welfare involvement. Most importantly, we begin breaking intergenerational cycles of violence, exploitation, addiction, and poverty within families and communities. This is not simply social spending. It is long-term prevention and cost reduction across multiple public systems.
Merci, Madame Jasmine.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Much appreciated. Ms. Roberts, you have the floor. 6 minutes.
Chair, through you, I first want to commend all the witnesses. You are the heroes to all women, so thank you for what you do, because I know it's not easy. My first question is going to be to Jasmine Defina. Jasmine, I've admired your work. I know that you're working, educating schools and students and teachers and police officers on the awareness of human trafficking. It is crucial in this country that we stop, or at least put a halt on human trafficking. As you and I have discussed many, many times, 93% of people that are human trafficked are children. 22% of that 93% are under the age of 18. 7% are boys, and they don't make it. A lot of them commit suicide. It's tragic. This is not the Canada that we want to remember. So my first question to you, Jasmine, is communities across Canada are increasingly worried about public safety and repeat offenders, targeting vulnerable women and girls while supporting systems remain overwhelmed. Do gaps in the current justice and social support systems continue to leave survivors at risk?
Yes, absolutely, they do. A lot of the trafficking cases happen with offenders that are on bail or who have not received adequate time for their trafficking previous people.
Oh, I'm currently working on a bill, a private member's bill, to strengthen the opportunity to have these criminals stay behind bars to protect our survivors. I want to call them survivors. They're not victims. You guys are survivors, and I commend you for it. Would you agree that lengthening their sentencings would help survivors feel more safe and not at risk?
Yeah, I think that's one of the main barriers why survivors don't come forward and report their trafficking is because they understand that there really is no justice served. Oftentimes, traffickers are not being found guilty. The women have to go through an atrocious process to even take the stand, and a lot of times they don't survive the process themselves. And like you said, they die by suicide or they relapse and spiral, and the traffickers are not even getting found guilty. And if they are, they're seeing 2, 4, 7 years maximum, where the women have to then watch their back for the traffickers when they get out again shortly.
I've spoken to many survivors is the fact that the reason they don't come forward is because they get re-traumatized, and the perpetrators often threaten them and threaten their families. So if we could ensure their protection and have them come forward so that they can testify without entering the courtroom, would you think that that would help ensure that the sentencings meet the crime?
Yes, absolutely. I think that would be wonderful. I've had situations with women that I've supported through court where traffickers have showed up in their apartments, holding them at gunpoint. Oftentimes they find them in the parking lots at the courts, and survivors are just kind of left there. They don't even have police accompaniment. So I absolutely agree with that.
So I recently met with a family member, a mother of a child who was autistic, and she was groomed at the age of 15. And I was disappointed. I was disgusted, to be honest with you. She finally found her daughter after 5 years. They had to operate on her anal, and now she's on suicide watch. What is it? The individual, the perpetrator, didn't get a day of jail sentencing. How is it that we are allowing these perpetrators, I call them animals, to continue to terrorize our women, our children, our boys? Why is it that the laws take so long to change to ensure the protection of all the survivors?
Yeah, I'm not sure how the systems work, but what I've seen is that a lot of people don't have the passion that you do, Ms. Roberts, to put forward these private member bills and make sure that these things are happening. I think a lot of times we talk about supporting survivors, and then we don't really see the outcomes in the end.
Industry is a $239 billion business annually. There should be a penalty to all the buyers, all the perpetrators, to ensure that those funds are put aside to help the survivors. Would you agree with that?
I think that would help both the system with the victim quick response, that weighing a lot of the system, and to help with the medical coverage that survivors need after. Like you said, there's operations, there's trauma therapy, there's all kinds of costs to recovery. Yeah. And so I think that would be really helpful, and it would also help them to feel like they receive some sort of justice as well.
I know my time is almost up, and I had so many more questions for all the other witnesses, but I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I have been working on this for 4 years, and I will tell you, there are nights I go home and I just can't get to sleep. I can't get those visions out of my mind. So thank you for what you do. God bless all of you.
Merci, Madame Roberts.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Ms. Maynard, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome to all of the witnesses. Your work is important. It's essential. Ms. Gaudreau, I'm delighted to see you. Thanks for making yourself available. I'll start with you because there's an aspect I'd like to focus on in the report we'll prepare. We talk about the different people you serve. I think you can provide information, and I invite Ms. Bigawet to respond as well. I'd like to draw an overview of the staff who work in shelters. Can you provide information on that, please? I'll begin quickly, and then Mylène can continue. For us, what we see at shelters is that they need to double their staff. Women's cases are more and more complex, so they're overwhelmed, and they're not able to meet all of the demand in Quebec. Well, for our federation last year, about 9,000 women were turned away because there's a lack of space, and we're not able to help women who need immediate support. We also see an increase in the use of our external services. Increasingly, our staff see younger women using external services. It's hard to reach them, especially women who have housing insecurity. So it becomes very difficult for shelter workers. There's a real labor shortage. It's not easy to have that 24/7 schedule because our homes are an essential service, especially when there's a crisis. I can let Mylène continue, please. Yes, in the same vein, in addition to what Julie has said, the housing crisis means that clients stay for longer and it becomes harder to leave. And so that means that it can be more difficult to meet the demand that comes up. So that's something that we're told often. And all of those elements, the increasing complexity, so workers need to be increasingly specialized in different areas. And with the current funding, we're not able to offer the salaries that would reflect their experience and their specialization. So we lose staff. There's a lot of staff turnover, and it becomes hard when we need to have more people, and some shelters aren't able to do that, and everything falls on one employee to answer the crisis line, to meet different situations that come up. So that's a bit of an overview for you. There are more things we could discuss. Thank you. That's informative. Ms. Bookchin, would you like to add something? And I have a sub-question. I'm curious about the impact on women who use the services, that turnover. I'm sure that trust is important. The women who go to shelters need stability. So I'd like to hear your perspective, Ms. Bookchin.
Yes, I think there are a few things. One is about education and training for shelter workers. There are capacity issues, there's no doubt. Sometimes there's only one staff person on in an overnight shift with a house full of traumatized people. But there's no standardized training or education for shelter workers, at least not here in Nova Scotia. And so they're not necessarily equipped for the kinds of challenges they're facing, mental health challenges, substance use challenges, and also if there are children, the trauma-specific needs of children and youth in those situations. They don't necessarily, most people learn on the job, and they are not, we use trauma-informed as a buzzword these days, but trauma-specialized, trauma-sensitive responses are things that not a lot of people really understand or are educated in, and that can have a huge impact on the clients who are coming into the shelter, because if the staff are dysregulated, many of them carry their own lived experience, they're suffering vicarious trauma, they have moral injury, because the organizations are not caring for them or validating their experiences. And when clients come in and face dysregulated staff, that can be very harmful. And we're hearing that from people who go into shelters. And this is really an unnamed and silenced dimension that we don't really talk about. And the turnover. So, I mean, people do go to shelters repeatedly sometimes. I had somebody describe to me that they were a frequent flyer at a transition house. And so when you're constantly seeing new people and everybody has different levels of experience or competence in trauma-sensitive responses, it does damage the trust for people, and women talk. So if people are not having a good experience, that kind of dynamic gets spread through the community, and it does compromise trust in the community.
Merci beaucoup. Je vous amène complètement ailleurs.
Thank you very much. On another topic, we don't talk about third stage housing, but since we're discussing solutions, we've understood that there's the first stage, crisis, and then there's second stage. What would be the models? I have to stop you there, Ms. Menard, in your dream. Inaudible. You'll be able to continue later. Ms. Larouche, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I thank the witnesses for joining us for this important study. It's impossible to overstate how important and difficult your work is. Without you, where would these women be? So once again, thank you very much to Ms. Bookchin, Ms. Defina. But my first questions will be for the Federation of Women's Shelters. So Ms. Bigawet and Ms. Saint-Pierre Gaudreau, I am pleased to have you with us today. Let's talk about your brief. You've said that shelters are infrastructure for women, but resources are insufficient. What are the consequences now for women and children's safety? You mentioned this in your opening remarks, but I'd like to hear more about the situation. Yes, if I may begin. What we see is that when women turn to services, and 9,000 times this year they were turned away, well, we can wonder where else would they go. We're talking about the first stage. With external services, it could be to have support for women who are experiencing housing insecurity. Once women have access to housing, as my colleague said at the beginning, sometimes 35% of the women who are with us are headed towards housing insecurity again because they don't necessarily have community or affordable housing available to them once they leave the shelter. So that's one of our major recommendations. Yes, shelters offer essential support. They accompany women. It's necessary. They've experienced many forms of violence and very complex lives. But when there's no social housing with community support, if women have access to low-income housing, it might not be safe for them. It shouldn't be mixed housing. There should be ongoing community support. And then the question of the third stage. And so women in some cases aren't able to work on their trauma, their complex trauma, when they have 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years in a transitional housing situation. There really need to be permanent solutions so women can work through their trauma. And that's what I would say to begin. Perhaps Mylène would like to continue. As you've said, the 9,000 cases turned away. Well, when women call, it's when they need shelter. And that really increases the risk of danger. They have to call 2, 3, 4 times before they get a spot. Sometimes there's just that one-time momentum to escape the situation. And that's very concerning. And a concern we have is that with time, women know that it becomes increasingly difficult to have a place, and maybe they'll stop calling. And some women say, we know there aren't enough spots. I don't want to take someone else's spot. They think that somebody else could be in a worse situation. So they might deprive themselves because there's that climate of a lack of spaces, and we can't lie, that is the reality. So that's a risk as well. All right, 9,000 cases were turned away, but you said 12,000 for member shelters in 2024, 2025, that there weren't enough places. So what happens to those women when they're turned away from a shelter? We can talk about those women. And there's also what we're hearing currently at another committee on homelessness. There's hidden homelessness. Some women live in houses and have to offer sexual services to have somewhere to sleep at night. So what are the consequences of those 12,000 refusals? It's exactly what you've just said. Julie was talking about a vicious cycle, so a homelessness spiral for women. It's exactly that. Women to not end up on the street because they're aware of the dangers of that, but also because often they have children, and being on the street with their children would mean losing their children, losing custody of them. So they'll do anything not to be on the street. Yes, go live with relatives, go live in other shelters. Sometimes women will have their children stay with relatives, and to not overwhelm their relatives, they themselves will sleep in their cars or in parks to ensure their children's safety. So those are the consequences, and it's directly connected. And we're working with a researcher who's doing a longitudinal study, and the majority of women who become homeless, well, they've all experienced violence, and a vast majority of them at a certain time were not able to find shelter because of the form of violence they experienced. It was hard to have it recognized, or because there wasn't a place available. So that's real. These women have fallen through our safety net. Thank you, Mylène. I have to interrupt you. The time just slips away. Ms. Goodridge, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for joining us today.
Miss Bookchin, sorry. I find your use of trying to do prevention by working with schools and giving a space to that is really important. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, maybe a minute, about the successes you've seen with that program.
So in the school system in Nova Scotia, we've been advocating for violence prevention, healthy relationship training from primary to grade 12 for some years. And just recently, the Department of Education invited community-based organizations to review some new curriculum outcomes so that there would be that curriculum from grades P to 12. There has been a little bit of training of teachers. It was rolled out in grade 10 this past fall, and now we understand that it's on pause because there is concern by teachers that they don't feel prepared to teach the material, to grapple with disclosures, to maybe be able to deal with their own trauma that they're carrying in case they get triggered. So we are working with a number of community organizations to see how we can develop some tools, videos, resources that can help teachers and administrators feel more comfortable and confident about teaching to those curriculum outcomes. Now, there are a lot of resources that are provided by the school system, but still, I think there's fear. And it's hard to grapple with that. There's also a program called Guys Work, which was funded provincially and federally.
Thank you. Sorry, I have a very limited amount of time,
okay.
So I do have to cut you off. Ms. Defina, I'm now going to switch gears and switch over to you. I've had the opportunity of meeting a number of survivors of human trafficking, and one of the things many of these exceptionally brave, incredible women have shared with me is their path towards recovery and how complicated it was to go into a space with all of the trauma that they had from that and then face their demons as they're going through recovery without having enough wraparound supports. And when I was reading up about your guys' organization, I just, like, my heart melted. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you guys get women into recovery from addiction.
Yes, thank you so much. When we start working with women in an outreach capacity, so once we receive a referral from whether it be a hospital, a police officer, other agency, we start working with the individuals in community and meet them where they're at and wrap around the supports right there. We try really hard to get them into different addiction programs throughout the country. We try within Ontario first, and then we often have to go across the country, and then we support them in our outreach capacity while they're still in the addiction recovery program. And then once they come to our stage 2 housing, it's a sober living facility, and we have an addictions counselor there who has lived experience as well, and she's been doing addiction services supports for 36 years. So she works one-on-one with the individuals, and then we work very closely with the NA community. And then once the survivors leave our home, we continue with our follow care program to ensure that they are able to stay sober and continue on the good path.
Much for the work you guys do. I think that's so incredibly important. I myself have had the privilege, coming from Alberta, of working with none other than the spectacular Paul Brandt and his Not in My City. And we named Fort McMurray, my home airport, as the third Not in My City airport to be able to identify human trafficking and be able to stop it in its tracks. And every little piece counts, because a lot of people think human trafficking happens some faraway place in some faraway area, and they don't realize that it happens to the girl next door. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the demographics you guys see, so that people that are listening, tuned in today, can hear exactly how local this problem really is.
Yeah, so majority of the women that we support are local Canadians. Actually, I don't think we've supported anyone that's been from another country over the 15 years that I've done this work. I've only supported a handful that come from overseas. Majority are domestic trafficking cases, so they are born and raised in Canada. A great percentage of the women that we support are Indigenous. I myself was a university student. I'm Métis. I'm French and Indigenous.
Merci beaucoup, chère madame.
Thank you very much. I'll have to interrupt you to give Ms. Nathan the opportunity to ask her questions for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. My first question is to Ms. Bukchin. I know that from your work, where's the question here? Okay. governments often measure shelter systems based on occupancy or short-term outputs rather than long-term survivor outcomes. What matrix should policymakers prioritize when evaluating whether transitional housing programs are truly helping women rebuild stability and independence?
That's a really good question. We have such a lack of data in Canada about the consequences of gender-based violence in so many different ways. And I would love to see a longitudinal study about when women go to a shelter, how many of them go back to an abusive relationship, how many of them go on to second stage housing, how many of them rebuild their lives in ways that is healthy for themselves and for their children, and how many of them have access to trauma-sensitive supports and mental health work, and what their financial status is after they have had to abandon a home and potentially all their possessions. I think we don't have that kind of data, and we really need it.
If I could pose the same question to Jasmine Defina, because I know that your work is very longitudinal, and it takes a long time for recovery, and it's not like the other shelters. So how do you manage that? And how do you your reports and your statistics and the funding that supports that, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so we serve a lot more individuals in our outreach and follow care services because our house only fits 5 women at a time. And like you said, we are long term because it takes several years for survivors to fully, get on their feet after leaving these situations. So women can stay in our program up to 7 years, but the most we've had is about 2.5 years in our home, and they did the recovery program, and then they stayed to start university or get on their feet with other jobs. But typically, we see that it takes about 7 years, I'd say, from the point that somebody leaves the situation until they're on their feet and ready to take their own independence. So in order to do that, we can't take as many.
I understand. So shelter beds, as you have mentioned in your opening, are very scarce, and for especially trafficking victims, it's very far in between. So thank you for what you do. I'm an MP from the Durham region, so I'm kind of curious about this. What's the youngest a victim that you have seen trafficked?
The youngest that I've personally seen is 8 years old.
That is very scary. And I could understand teenagers, how you could support them, but how do you work with an 8-year-old? Do you have to involve their parents, or what is their care like for anyone who's under 12?
Yeah, so we support adult women, so 16 plus. We don't work with children, but that was a case through victim services that was reported to us. And we have to work with the parents and the children's aid workers. In that situation, they would go through child welfare, and there are youth homes for 12 years old and up. So I believe child welfare would handle that solely on their own.
And I would go back to Ms. Bookchin. And access to cultural and linguistic services can significantly affect whether survivors feel safe seeking supports. So for immigrant or marginalized women outside major urban centers facing additional barriers when attempting to access shelters and transitional housing service, can you talk a little bit about that? How that is like for that population who is further marginalized or falls into that intersectionality?
It's a huge gap, particularly in rural areas.
Unfortunately, the time is up. The 5 minutes have concluded. Ms. Defina, we're having trouble with your connection. So someone will call you. A technician will call you. So please pick up the call so we can resolve that issue. Thank you. Now, Ms. Larouche, 2.5 minutes. Okay. My goodness. I think I'll need to follow up with you, dear witnesses. So thanks, Ms. Bookchin, Ms. Defina, Ms. St. Pierre Gaudreau, Ms. Bigawet. We'll have to talk again. I'll ask this question. In your brief, you talk of women. Well, excuse me. Your brief talks about women who have complex challenges and who are excluded from programs because of overly rigid requirements. What should the government do to make these programs more flexible to better reflect women's lives? When we're talking about, when you say criteria is too rigid, what do you mean? Well, the action plans, the strategies at the federal level or even at the provincial level cover issues of violence, but in a sort of exclusive way. There's funding provided for intimate partner violence, and then there's homelessness and mental health, but we need comprehensive approaches. What we see is that some shelters see on the ground the needs that women have, and when it's time to request funding, it might be tied to one topic, a specific topic. And so they wouldn't be able to develop the services that are needed on the ground. So we're really calling for a more comprehensive approach for the services that can be offered. And what's specific about our federation is that some shelters offer services, but not necessarily based on current violence or immediately leaving intimate partner violence. Women may have experienced the consequences of violence, but a few weeks or months ago. So we're better able to meet women's needs, because if they left a violent home and then they were in hidden homelessness for a few months and then they look for a spot in a shelter, there are some resources that are more rigid that might turn them away. But when we look at their life experience, when we have a broader view, we see that the answer is necessary. Thank you. Now, Ms. Cody, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Again, thank you to all the witnesses for being here. It is a big job, and I'll just reiterate the same thanks of my colleagues. A lot of questions I have, but I'll start with Jasmine Defina, if I might. Recently, I attended a premiere of a documentary on the prevalence of human trafficking along the 401 corridor and the unique needs of survivors who are rescued and the supports to help them recover from the deep trauma and extreme abuse they experienced. And in your view, do you think the current shelter system provides that unique support needed for these survivors of trafficking?
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, tech just called me right now. I missed that question because I was listening to tech.
Okay, can I start again? Okay. I was just saying that I saw a documentary on human trafficking along the 401 corridor and the unique needs that survivors require in the shelter system. So I'm wondering if, in your view, do you think the current shelter system provides that unique support needed for survivors of trafficking?
Absolutely not. The shelters are designed for women fleeing intimate partner violence and domestic abuse, which is very different than the extremely complex cases of human trafficking. It's not a good fit for either of the people utilizing the spaces, and the staff, as was mentioned before, just don't have the capacity due to lack of standardized training, lack of understanding of the complexities, and simply sometimes only having one staff available just doesn't support that need.
So again, to you, Ms. Defina, for individuals who are trying to escape violence, addiction in the home, or trafficking situations, does the presence of active drug use inside the standard shelters recreate the very conditions they are trying to leave? And how does that affect their sense of safety, their recovery, and even their willingness to stay in the system at all?
In my experience in the work that I've done, well, all survivors are different and they all have different needs and routes and services that they think are best for them. And I would say majority of the women that I've supported do prefer to go abstinence-based and go into sober living environments and do find it harmful to live in the harm reduction spaces. But there is a need for harm reduction spaces as well for those who aren't ready for sober living just yet.
And unfortunately, we're hearing a lot about elder abuse and the trafficking of seniors on the rise. Would you agree that the government Bill C-16 should also include persons of trust within the definition of coercion and intimate violence in order to further protect seniors escaping violence and abuse?
Yes, absolutely. We are seeing that as well, and I agree with that.
Perfect. So we're also seeing more youth entering shelters and encampments. When young people are placed in general shelter settings alongside adults dealing with addiction or violence, what risk does that create? And is that an appropriate model for these vulnerable youth?
It's inappropriate model, absolutely. The adults that have been in these situations for years pose a threat to the youth that are coming in. They often recruit them into gangs, into violence, into trafficking, and absolutely into drug use and trafficking of drugs and stuff as well.
My next question is for Sue Bookchin. There's often an assumption that shelters are stable, controlled environments, but day-to-day reality can be much more unpredictable, especially when staff are managing complex behaviors and safety concerns. How much control do staff actually have to maintain order and safety, and what impact does burnout and fatigue have on maintaining safe environments?
I can speak about transition houses, shelters that are not built specifically for women escaping violence. I know less about, but I have heard a lot about women feeling unsafe in them. And so there are many fewer parameters and contexts in which staff have much control over that, and again, short staffing. But even in transition houses, I think people are limited in terms of how they can ensure that the workplace environment is actually supporting everybody's well-being, both the clients and the staff. And it has a lot to do with leadership and whether the leadership of the organization have been trained.
Thank you. I do have one question I'd like to ask Julie St. Pierre Gaudreau. Sorry, I'm not I pronounced it. Gaudreau. In your last appearance before this committee during our study on Section 810 of the Criminal Code, you noted that Section 810 often creates a false sense of security for women in abusive relationships due to unenforced peace bonds. Can you speak to how the lack of enforcement on this issue creates additional dangers for women entering shelters?
Oui, en fait, c'est lors de l'étude par rapport.
Yes, during the study on 810 breaches, what we've noticed in Quebec is that when there were 810s, conditions would be breached a number of times, and when women asked for an 810 for their own protection, it gave them a false sense of security. And thank you, Ms. Gaudreau. I gave more time to Ms. Cody because there was a technical issue. Ms. Maynard, I think you were going to conclude things for us. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll turn again to the Federation of Women's Shelters. With the creation of Build Canada Homes, we will be supporting the implementation of new houses. Are there specific things that should be considered? Let's think of first stage, and I'll get back to my dream. Let's look at the third stage. What kind of models should we be looking to?
Oui, je peux...
I can start. We have, well, not necessarily concerns. Currently, Build Canada Homes is a little big and vague. There's a lot that remains to be determined. There's the first stage housing that will be funded. It wasn't necessarily clear at the beginning. It was going to be more about transitional housing or more permanent housing. One of our priorities would be to have affordable housing. We want to see the construction of off-market housing, non-private market housing to maintain affordability, and having that first and second stage, it's a priority because currently we're overwhelmed. We have more demand than we can meet. And so for permanent housing construction, we need it to be accessible. It could be non-mixed low-income housing. So specifically for women, could be long-term housing, non-mixed, and 25% of the national strategy on housing was for housing for women. We think it should be renewed for the next strategy. Thank you. Ms. Bigouette, are there some regions, well, you're in Quebec, of course, are there some regions we should prioritize? Are some areas more in need? Well, there's a committee on this in Quebec, a working group with a number of partners. Areas like Montreal are overwhelmed currently, but what really concerns us is that there are a number of regions where there's no shelter with a broader mission to help women who've experienced different types of violence or violence other than intimate partner violence. So there's the North Shore, Abitibi-Témiscamingue, Chaudière-Appalaches, the Lower St. Lawrence. So there are some very specific areas where there's no type of shelter of that type. And so if a woman experienced violence from her landlord or hidden homelessness, as Julie said, when it's time to look for shelter, she'll have to go elsewhere because she won't be able to find something in her own region. Ms. Bookchin, there's an organization in my writing called Avant Coup that helps men. It's their only clients. Men who struggle with anger management and violence. We spoke a number of times. This organization often deplores the fact that it's women who have to leave. Children have to move. They have to go to new schools. It adds a lot of turbulence to that transition. In the new models we're imagining to help women who are trying to leave intimate partner violence, should we rethink the way women find a roof over their head?
Absolutely. That is really desperately needed. That the burden that is on the shoulders of women is just untenable when you've been traumatized and you've been abused. To have to leave your home and not know where you're going to live or not knowing how you're going to support yourself or your children is torturous. It's a torturous path for women. And we need to think about ways to hold men accountable, to be if the people who are committing violence are the people who need to be removed, how to do that in a way that keeps them accountable and also provides them with the services that they need in order to change their behaviors. Otherwise, they just go on to do the same thing with other partners. I think it's an innovative idea that we need to really pursue.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say to each one of you, sometimes you were interrupted. If you want to provide recommendations to the committee or to add more information, we'd take them. I'm going to interrupt you once again. Thank you to each one of you for joining us. It was very interesting. Thank you to my colleagues who've asked interesting questions. I wish you a good evening. Is the committee in agreement to adjourn? Thank you.
Merci.